Well, I'm going to get started. Good morning, everybody. My name is Christine Charles. I'm an MSU Extension educator based out of the Southwest area in Kalamazoo County. And welcome to Virtual Breakfast, our second of the series this year. We'll have Ian McDonald be joining us this morning from University of Guelph. He is the Crop Innovation Specialist with the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development. You might have to help me out with that acronym, Ian, but
Ministry of Agriculture, Food, and Rural Affairs.
there we go. And he'll be talking to us about repairing damaged fields, which is very important given our situation from this past fall and going into the spring. So thank you so much for joining us.
So hello, everyone. Again, Ian McDonald, Crop Innovation Specialist. We've been doing a lot of work in compaction, but it's been primarily on the avoidance side of the equation because the recovery side is much more difficult. And that's why I changed the title a little bit and put the fix isn't in, because there's not a whole lot we can do, but let's talk about the things that we can deal with. So one of the things I wanted to show you was just that we feel your pain from here in Ontario because we've had some wet harvests in the past too, and they've created lots of problems that you guys are facing this spring. The other thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a great big deep rut to be causing compaction. So here's a picture of a pea field that's just been harvested with a pea combine. And what you notice is that there's not much of a rut, but when you get a big heavy machine that's taking off very heavy wet material, you can still run into compaction problems that may not be as visible from the soil surface perspective. I think this is an important quote from Aaron and Jody at North Dakota State and Minnesota. The best way to manage soil compaction is to prevent it from happening. The old adage of stay off the field until it is fit to work still applies. But here's the caveat. However, there is a possibility of severe economic repercussions of delaying planting, harvesting, or other operations that may outweigh compaction damage or loss. This is a dilemma farmers face in a wet spring or fall, and it is not easy to resolve. And they have a new publication called Upper Midwest Soil Compaction Guide. And anybody that's interested in compaction, I would suggest it's a really good read. Okay, and so I said to you that we're working on avoidance here in Ontario for the most part, and I'm not going to read all of this, but these are sort of the BMPs that we've sort of come to believe putting one of these or many of these in place helps you to be more resilient in your soils when you do have those tough harvests and springs, but it's something that doesn't happen overnight. It's a sort of an ongoing process, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And so in the old days, we used to have this thing, let Mother Nature and her frost fix things. And that is not working as effectively today for a couple of reasons. And those are that warmer winters with less frost to depth and less cycles of frost thaw are meaning we're not getting that same expansion and contraction activity happening down in the soil. We also have equipment that's bigger and heavier, and that's driving compaction deeper. These heavy weights are causing problems, and I want to show you an example or two. And the other thing is the soil is often too wet, and so that we're just not getting the chance for that. If it's too wet, it's not as easy to have the frost manipulate as well. And then the soil health of our soils, as we've moved out of mixed farming, 40, 50 years ago to primarily cash cropping on many acres throughout Ontario, Michigan, and elsewhere,
What are you doing?
it's created an environment where the soils aren't quite as resilient. And so when we go to think about fixing compaction, we need to ask three questions. How deep is the compaction? How extensive is it across the field? And how wet is the field currently when we're thinking about trying to do something? And so you need to think about whether that compaction is shallow or deep, and we can use penetrometers and tile probe to sort of figure that out, or just looking at the extent of the ruts. But that what you see on the surface doesn't necessarily tell you what's going on underground. So if things are shallow, then the freeze thaw, wet, dry cycles, they still are quite active. So in the top sort of 5 to 6 inches. Shallow tillage when it's dry as possible and a little as possible to fill the ruts, but not fix the compaction. And I'll explain that in a minute. The spring, especially if it's wet, is not the time to try and fix compaction created by a wet harvest last fall. All we're trying to do is get sort of a level surface so that we can plant into it and allow those crop root systems to start aiding in the compaction renewal. But the thing that's important is don't work the whole field in terms of trying to address that. If it's only part of the field that's affected, and hit the worst parts the most to try and get that seed bed. The thing that we're trying to avoid is getting tillage implements down into that wet soil and bringing that up and mixing it, because we can actually make the situation worse, which is what we're trying to avoid. If it's deep compaction, again, we're just trying to fix the ruts, not the actual compaction layer that has been created. If we deep rip when those soils are wet, we cause more compaction, because not only have we got reduced pore space, but now we have smearing that's impacting infiltration and other activities going on down deeper in that soil. We want to use cover crop recipes with different root geometries and profiles, depending on what is our cropping sequence that we're going into. So cover crops are great when you've got cereals in the rotation and such, not so good when you've got corn and soybeans in that rotation. You're pretty much dependent on tillage. And one of the things about deep ripping fields that people don't give a lot of thought to, which is very important, is that if I deep rip a field and within a few weeks come out with a big manure or fertilizer spreader and run over those places where I've deep ripped, I have the opportunity or the potential to drive that compaction even deeper. And so, if the compaction was at 12 inches and I put a deep ripper in at 14, and now on those ripped places I drive it down to 18 or 19 inches, now all of a sudden both the time and the cost of chasing that compaction deeper into the profile is more of a problem. So again, just to reiterate, what we're trying to do in the spring, especially when it's a wet spring, is let the soil dry as much as possible within the window of reasonable planting. Then work that ground very shallow, just trying to fill in those ruts so that we can actually seed something into that damaged area. And then we go back in later in the season with cover crop scenarios or deep tillage scenarios, or other crops with great root systems that will help to penetrate those layers. Okay, what we want to really avoid is in trying to make the fix, we don't want to make it worse, and that can happen. The other thing is, if you're looking for compaction in terms of where it is and how deep it is, be very careful in terms of thinking about it in terms of putting the tile probe over the penetrometer into the soil. If the soil is wet, it will give you a false reading. Compaction is really sort of obliterated in terms of measurement when we have wet soil, and the probe will just slide right through there. But then when it dries out, you'll hit that compacted layer again. So keep that in mind as you are out there probing around with your tools. Okay, so let's just change gears a little bit. I think this is important, and some of my farmers here in Ontario get pissed at me when I talk about this, but what is the cause of soil compaction? And I would say to you that compaction is a management decision. And let me explain that to you. It's part of our overall risk management strategy, and it's because we have choices that we make as producers and advisors on when to do certain things. And in terms of what compaction is scientifically, is essentially a loss of pore space. And so what are the management things that either detract or enhance the amount of pore space in the soil profile that's relative to good cropping and soil conditions? And so when you look at these typical management choices that we make each year, all of these in an individual year, but more on the collective over years, are impacting the resilience of our soil. And the point is to try and build that soil resilience to the point of being able to recover better. And I think of soil as a bed spring, right? And how many times can you run over it and have the bed springs contracting and expanding before you do damage? And the newer bed that's healthy, so to speak, is better able to resist that because it's got more buffering capacity in it. But back to the management decision, we make the decisions on what equipment to put out when, under what conditions, etc. And so when we think about compaction, and back to Jody and Aaron's statement of, try and stay off when the soil is not fit, but then at some point there's an economic cost that you have to weigh. That is a very tough decision to make. And it's sort of pay the piper now or later type of scenario. Okay, so let's just talk about sort of what's been happening in the industry. If you look here in the 60s, we had wheel loads that were quite a bit lower than they are today. But as those wheel loads have increased, the tire volume has actually stayed pretty parallel to that, which is a good thing. But unfortunately, despite those big tires, we're still getting a reduction in contact area on the soil surface. So think about that monster tire, but how much of it is actually touching the surface? And we've lost there, and that's something that we need to think about. We need to think about, the grossness of these weights. So here's Brent's big 2596 grain buggy. It holds 2,500 bushels. Well, that, all this equipment is getting bigger, higher capacity, and therefore heavier. This thing is 187,000 pounds or 94 tons. And I don't know about you guys in Michigan, but in Ontario, our roads are restricted to 10 tons per axle on the wheels. And here we're going into an ecologically dynamic system and sort of putting an extreme amount of weight on that living ecosystem. So farmers don't like this either, but I say to them, you bought that big buggy and that's great. And we've got huge combines that are moving stuff out of the soil very quickly. But you have to keep in mind that in tough conditions, maybe you shouldn't fill that thing and make the track system or the carrying system under it be able to carry that reduced weight with much less stress being put into the soil. This is an important graph from Shear and Fulton at Ohio State. And what I wanted to point out here is that at 10 tons per axle at wet, normal, and dry conditions, this is the trajectory of compaction potential losses to corn yield. As we move up to 20 tons, look at how that oval has increased. And as we go to 30 tons, that oval is getting even bigger. And so weight by soil moisture interaction is a very important consideration. This is another important chart, again, that Shear and Fulton adapted from Reeder and Haskin from 94. And it's kind of reversed in that yield loss due to lower soil compaction. So this is the stuff that's happening deep down. And this is the 94 tons from the big Brent wagon that I'm putting on. And notice that that yield loss is very hard, if not impossible, to get back. And axle weights now sort of impact this medium subsoil depth, and they cause this amount of compaction or yield loss, and they are recoverable. And tire pressure is the main factor in terms of surface compaction that's happening. And yes, it happens. Yes, it can be detrimental in the first year. And as long as we don't continue to exacerbate that by driving in the same place again next year, it's recoverable relatively quickly. So I just want to show you an example of this. This is one of our pride and joys. The Noon Company in Stratford, Ontario, built this big quad steer, and that's got 12 900 size tires on it. We've done a bunch of compaction work, and it's a complicated graph, but essentially within this oval, I'm showing the stress at 40 psi tire pressure on those big tires at 6, 12, and 20 inches deep into the soil. And you'll notice that these lines are quite high for both green, black, and red. When we come in and we lower that soil pressure in the tires down to 10 psi, notice how we've seen a big reduction in the level of stress transferred into the soil. And so, especially in the shallow topsoil and the shallow subsoil, we've had quite a change in the stress. But when I move to here, and again, these ovals are the exact same size, note that we don't see as much reduction in the deep depth because the total weight of that machine is such a problem. And so just to finish up, here's some places where you can go to get some of the information that I've talked about today, and feel free to use that. We're just finishing up on the Field Crop News, all of the reports from the various locations that we've done these compaction trials over the last 4 or 5 years, and that should be up within the next week or so. So our goal is less moisture, less weight, less pressure, and more contact area out there. There's all kinds of things that you can do. You just have to sort of work them into your management system over time to make those soils more resilient. And I'll end it right there. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Ian. Okay, so we'll invite Ian back on and open our time up to questions. I'll get us started here as people are typing in questions or thinking of questions in the chat. Now, I know we didn't get into the weeds too much on tillage implements, but I think a lot of folks really don't like to think of all tillage implements as the same, and they aren't. So when we're thinking about one, addressing compaction or maybe reducing the potential for compaction, what implements are ones that should be reserved for an as-needed basis in your mind, and what are implements that you're seeing not having as significant an effect on compaction, right? So our chisel plow is really the way to go if we're trying to reduce our impact on the soil, or are there other implements like a strip till that you've been enjoying seeing out there?
And when you say that, Christine, are you saying before compaction happens or trying to fix compaction? That's too
let's go with both. Before compaction happens, how do we avoid it? And then once we have it in our fields, the tools to fix it, but then again, avoiding it as we go forward.
So I'm going to do the fixing compaction first, because that's probably the less controversial one. Again, since we're not trying to fix compaction this spring because the soils are probably too wet, especially if it's deep compaction. If it's shallow compaction, then we can do that. We're trying to keep from using implements that have to run deep to be effective, because in running deep, now you're going to be sort of in that wet layer and pulling that stuff up. We're trying to avoid that. We're just trying to fill those ruts, essentially. So, and I preface this that if you've got wet soils and you've got ruts and you're just trying to get a crop in the field, which is what I recommend, and that you deal with the compaction later, then implements like cultivators with big sweeps, discs, that will move soil laterally to fill those ruts, that's what we're after. And we're trying to level it. We're trying to break that up because it's all been smeared from the compaction. All the rutting causes big smears along the wheel tracks and stuff like that. So it's those implements that you can run shallowly and still have them operate effectively. So a chisel plow is got to really run at a deeper depth than an S-tine cultivator or a disc to have the same amount of lateral soil movement. So, the high-speed discs, cultivators, anything that's going to be shallow and move the soil laterally. Long-term, in terms of building resilience in the soil, we're having guys here in Ontario having tremendous success with strip till, where they're only, working 8 to 10 inches of a 30-inch band and planting into that, getting good fertilizer placement, etc. Tremendous work. In general, I think it's important not to do tillage the way Dad and Grandpa did it just because that's what they did. I think it's very important to look at your situation, both in terms of what you're trying to accomplish and the conditions that you're working in terms of the amount and type of tillage that you need. I've got a few guys working with biostrip till here in Ontario, which is really neat. You plant two different types of covers and you plant into one of the set of covers that dies over winter. You just push it out of the way. And the seed bed there is as beautiful as any seed bed from any piece of tillage I've ever seen. And so, less is more in when it comes to tillage, especially as you manage soils to be better, more healthy and more resilient. I'll leave it at that.
Thanks for that. And I've also seen those bio strips. They're really neat and have some good effects, I think, here in Michigan as well. So going to a question from Dale, does organic matter have any effect on compaction?
Absolutely, because think of as the organic matter as adding more spring to the bed mattress that I talked about as an example. And so increasing organic matter enhances the resilience of those soils. It can absorb more, it can bounce back, and its recovery is faster when you do serious damage. So whether it's nutrients or compaction fighting or crop production, more organic matter is always better.
Great. Another question here. Would it be worth having a small implement, to purchase just to fix the ruts and standing water? Also, when should we go into the field? So is it worth buying something, having it in your back pocket just to fix ruts?
So yes and no. Implements are expensive and implements need a lot of maintenance and stuff like that. So the less implements you have on your farm to get the effective work done is the better, right? And it also is a function of how much damage has been done. And so if it's just a little part of the field near the headland where you've loaded the trucks or wagons from the buggy or the combine, that rut area is relatively concentrated. So maybe in that case, you could get away with a smaller implement and do less damage because you can go out there with a smaller tractor and stuff, right? But if the area is quite extensive that's been damaged and it's rutted up and you're trying to fix, time is money too, right? And your bigger implements, again, that'll move soil horizontally are probably the choice.
Right, yeah. And then another question here. How about using a box blade to fill in ruts? And then I'll project the CCA credits as well as the same thing.
Yes, the problem, again, it depends on how wet is the soil when you're doing that, because a box spreader won't really break it up. You're just changing the placement of smeared soil from one place to the other, and it won't break up because the idea of filling those ruts is that you're filling them at a point when you've let that sort of topsoil dry a bit. And so when you hit it with the implement, it's going to break up and move into those ruts. There are guys that use those box spreaders, whatever you want to call them. But I'm not so sure that's the right example. Again, all of this is using the old ag adage is it depends is the first response to any ag question, right? The wetter it is, the more problems that would be.
Perfect. I think Christine's video is a little frozen right now, but Ian, we do have one more question. I believe this one hasn't been discussed yet. How do you determine when the soil is dry enough to fix the compaction when you would be going to a depth of, say, 12 to 14 inches with the ripper implement?
So a crop farmer's first tool that they should always have with them is a narrow shovel or spade, right? And dig down and see how wet it is down there. And then it comes down to the old hand test, right? Do I ball it up and it doesn't fall apart? And when I ball it up, how slippery is that when I push my thumb through it? And again, that is so soil type dependent, and that's farmer intuition and tacit knowledge, right? Hopefully everybody has that understanding of what that soil should be like in that handful of soil when they trying to make a decision on when it's fit to be peeled.
Having some Zoom troubles here today, but caught the last half of that. That sounds like some good rule of thumb, definitely digging down for deciding whether or not you're ready to deep rip. So question for newly tiled ground. We've tiled a new field on 30-foot centers. Wanted to know the best method for working down the tile lines and leveling the field for planting.
Pretty well, again, it depends on how stony and stuff it is, right? That we're brought up within the tiling operation. Sometimes you want to use a tiling rake or something, but if that was the case, I wouldn't want one of these tiling rakes that gathers up all these rocks and puts them in the bucket type of thing. Or if I did, I'd want to drive it on the side, not over the tile, and have the rake out to the side, bringing those rocks across and in, because that weight is the problem. After new tiling or deep ripping, you've unconsolidated that soil to quite a depth. And now it's quite sensitive to any additional weight that you add on top of it. So be very careful if you're out there with a big cultivator. Don't have a tractor tire on the on where it was actually where that space is where the tile went. Try and keep whatever's on top of that relatively low. And the problem is it takes some significant amount of time, almost a season, for that soil to reconsolidate. So I'd just be very wary of putting heavy equipment, and I mean the wheels, over top of those runs of where the tile has been put in. But anything that levels it off to your satisfaction is good. Just keep the implement or really the power unit wheels off of that line.
Great. Well, I'm going to open it up and we'll come right back to Ian, to our specialists to see if they have any updates, anything that they'd like folks to check out. I know there's not a lot happening in the fields right now with this being so wet and being wet for a little bit longer, but is there anything folks would like to come on and say or report?
I just like to say something there, Christine.
Sure.
You got Dennis coming next week, and Dennis is working with my colleague Joanna Fallings here in Ontario on the Yen project in cereals, and that's something people should look at. It's really helping people up their management of cereal crops, and it's great because we've got Ontario, Ohio, Michigan, and a few other states now participating in that, and it's been really valuable, both for the producers and for us trying to make the best recommendations for people.
Yeah, it's been a great success in Michigan too. So really looking forward to Dennis's presentation next week. Well, if we don't have anything from specialists, I have another question for you, Ian. You mentioned controlled traffic in your best management practices. And, I haven't seen a ton of it out in Michigan. I know quite a few states and folks to the west of us have started using it. How do you get controlled traffic to work in some of our smaller sized fields or weirder shaped fields? Do you have any good tips and tricks or ideas on how to make this work if people are interested in pursuing that?
So again, a big proponent of controlled traffic farming. One of the problems is it can be quite expensive, because if you're dealing with sort of a mixed fleet of equipment that's like 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet, then, how do you set that? You really have to move your equipment to some standard width, and wider the better, so that you have less wheel tracks, right? So if you think about the
40-foot planter, 120-foot boom.
Yeah, exactly. You want it in multiples of your smallest implement. So, if you have relatively big fields, 40 feet is probably the best place to be. But again, it's expensive to get everything on 40, like they would in multiples of 40. Sort of one way into it when you don't have that is strip tillage, because it helps exactly where the corn rows are going to be. And so that helps you to drive everything else in the system. And if you have smaller fields, got to make the assumption that you've got smaller equipment, and the compaction thing really, it's not completely isolated to large, heavy equipment, but it is the sort of the worst case scenario. And so smaller farms tend to have less of that.
Yeah, those are great considerations there. I'm going to open it up again to specialists, or I know Dennis is coming on next week, but if anyone's scouting wheat or if Dennis is still around, how's wheat looking so far?
Yeah, good morning. This is Dennis. Yeah, wheat is actually looking pretty good. It overwintered fairly well. We didn't really have a real harsh winter, and we did have a period of cold temperatures in mid-January, but we had lots of snow cover as well. So in the fields that I've scouted, we've got good stands, and even wheat that was planted late is tillering pretty well. And the warm temperatures we had into the fall, right into through December, really helped even our late planted wheat to tiller more than what it normally would. So overall, I think the assessment on the wheat crop looks really good.
Great, good to hear. Okay, back to questions here. So are there big differences between tracks and tires?
Sorry for the dog barking in the background. That is a very tough question. Again, it depends. And what is interesting is that in the last 5 years, maybe a little bit longer, there's been a real convergence in that the track manufacturers have been able to configure tracks to be more like wheels, and the wheel companies have been able to make tires more like tracks. So when you start talking about central tire inflation systems with tires and dropping that pressure when you're in the field, so going from like that manure tanker example I showed you, going from 40 psi, which was the pressure needed on the road, to 10 psi in the field, you make for a much longer contact patch than if you had to drive that thing at 40 psi. Tracks will go through more crap, no doubt about it, okay? But you still have this total mass and axle weight problem. And so you can, again, the heavier the load, the more problematic it is that because the weight is transferred, whether it's a track or a tire. And so if all you're worried about is getting through those tough falls when the rain is coming and you're running up with the tires on the combine, and switching to a track would alleviate some of that. You can get the harvest out of the field. You still have to be careful of the risk to the compaction happening because it's kind of invisible. It's happening below ground because that weight is being transferred that deep. The other aspect of it is maintenance, right? And how many tires versus a track is the relationship in terms of how much is the maintenance and overall cost. So that takes a pretty sharp pencil nowadays to figure out what's the best decision there.
Right, lots to consider there. All right, so question for Jeff. Next weekend looks like a good opportunity for burn town applications. Do you see anything in the forecast that would contradict that? Maybe winds?
Good question. Right now, based on what we see, and it's a little bit at the edge of the predictability with any confidence. But that said, right now, looking at relatively seasonable temperatures for next weekend, but just as importantly, relatively dry. I don't see any major weather systems. So the wind issue, probably other than the typical daily cycles that we see with greater winds during the daytime, that does not look to be an issue. But the temperatures will be marginal. So we're talking about, at least in southern parts of the state, highs probably up in the low, maybe some mid-50s, and then nighttime temperatures down near freezing, and a little bit cooler than that as you go north. So the temperatures here, depending on what type of application, what kind of material, are going to be a little bit marginal. But it does look like an extended, maybe the beginning of that drier than normal pattern that we looked at here a few minutes ago. So keep fingers crossed, but I would say keep an eye on that forecast, because between now and at least a week out, it still could change significantly from what we have right now, the guidance.
Okay, well, great. Good thing to keep in the back pocket of to-do lists. So Good. All right, another question for Ian. Would it help to spread manure or straw on the ruts and tilling them in? Kind of thinking about how to address ruts that we're seeing in the field right now.
So I saw that question and I'm thinking, how do I answer that? I'm going to split it apart. Manure is always good as long as you use the caveat that don't make the problem worse, or don't reduce the value of the manure by compacting the soil and therefore not being able to get the value out of the manure. And so manure, I would say, yes, that would work. But again, be very careful that you're not adding to the problem. Manure is a great solution over time to build the organic matter, to build the resilience of that soil. And so getting manure out at good times and well worked into the soil in terms of taking advantage of the benefits of it. The straw one makes me a little bit nervous in that if you laid down straw and then you mix that in with the soil, depending on how much straw you're putting in there, you could create an environment when you go to seed that corn or soybean seed, you're putting it in almost like a dry air pocket, and wouldn't have good seed soil contact. So I'd be a little bit, again, I've never done it, and so I'm just sort of trying to brainstorm it, and that would make me a little bit nervous, because you need so much for it to be of much effect. And therefore, you'd be sort of mixing in these dry pockets as you try to incorporate it, I think.
Right, that's a good thing to keep in mind, weighing those options. Okay, I am looking here for questions. Well, any last comments? I'm thinking that might be a good note to end on. Any other things you'd like to end with, or key points?
I just really want to encourage people that avoidance is the best way. It is a management decision. There's all kinds of things. Look at that list from my presentation of the 14 things and see how many of those you can incorporate over time. We can avoid compaction if we have patience and we have the right setup, recognizing that some years you're going to get stung either way. And then it comes down to, what makes the most sense. But regardless, it's more than just this year we're worried about, right? So what's the long term that we're trying to accomplish with our farm operations and manage to that? No, don't try and avoid managing just for this year, because that's what gets us into trouble.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And thank you everyone who's joined us. We'll see you next week, and hope you have a great start to your day.